I've already welcomed you to the presentation this evening, Disability and the Workplace, You Can Work. It is part of our spring series of Connections California, Transition to Adulthood, one of PHP's newest programs. We wanted to be able to create an online statewide resource and information hub for all things transition to adulthood and adult services for people and families who have loved ones with all kinds of disabilities. So we have an extensive e-learning library. We have live events like this one this evening. We have packets of information with referrals to curated websites and links to other information that you'll find helpful in the categories and subcategories of transition to adulthood you'll find on the site. We couldn't have done any of this without Santa Clara Family Health Plan, so we're very grateful for their contribution. And now I'd like to introduce Debbie Drennan, who is an MSW and an AT specialist, actually for over 20 years. She is an assistive technology consultant and believes AT is a key component to successful inclusion of all individuals. And certainly there are many ET considerations when you talk about employment and being able to be successfully employed. But Debbie also will be able to speak to some of the legal ramifications of employment with a disability and then share some other tips as well. Debbie also recently completed training to become an inclusion facilitator with Beginning Together. She became passionate about assistive technology and inclusion because of her children, one of whom has cerebral palsy and another who has ADHD. Both are now successful, independent adults, in part due to assistive technology. So I'm going to stop my share and turn it over to Debbie. Thanks for being here, and thanks to our interpreters as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And quick housekeeping question. Alyssa, did you want me to go into the English room, or am I good where I am?
I think you need to go into the English room as well.
Okay, then I will do that.
If I'm wrong and one of the interpreters want to chat me and let me know that I'm wrong, I'd be happy to change my answer.
I don't know. That was the first I'd ever heard that. I'm like, I don't know. I'll find out. So I'll go ahead and put myself in the English room. Yeah. And if you can't hear me, somebody let me know.
Okay.
So now I'm in the English room, and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen.
Thank you.
And we'll go from there. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And here we go. Can everyone see my screen okay? I hope so. So there we go. I am here. Thank you. Thank you. So we are listening to Disability and the Workplace. You Can Work. As she said, this is who I am. This is what I do. But I'm mostly coming to you at this one today as a parent of two individuals who are both successful adults now with different disabilities and abilities. And I'm going to be highlighting some of their experiences, one with a visible disability, one with the invisible disability. So I'll be highlighting their experiences as I talk to you today about how they became employed, because both of them are now fully employed and are successful. And it's had its challenges, but the reason they are successful is because they knew what their rights were, they knew what they needed, and they knew how to ask for it. So today you're going to become familiar with both federal and California laws pertaining to individuals with disabilities and employment. You're going to also consider when to disclose a disability and to whom in the workplace environment, and when, right? When and to whom and if. You're also going to think about how to obtain any needed accommodations and assistive technology tools you might need to work. So these are the three areas I'm going to cover. Because everyone is so different, I'm not going to be able to tell you these are the AT tools you can use at work, because it's very much individualized, right? Somebody who has a specific learning disability like dyslexia will need very different tools and accommodations than somebody who has cerebral palsy and needs accommodations for their movement and physical disability. So I'm not going to go into specific tools. If you have specific questions about those specific tools, we can talk about that maybe at the end if there's time. But I'm not going to be able to go into that as much today, except to say that you can get what you need. All right, so let's start with the laws. There is a federal law you may have heard of called the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was amended in 2008. It was an update to the original one by then President Obama. And this is the big federal law that covers all things disability and disability rights for the entire United States of America. And under Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act is where they focus in on employment of individuals with disabilities. And the ADA states that employers with more than 15 employees must not discriminate based on someone's disability on anything employment related. It defines what a disability is and what a qualified individual with a disability is. And it also defines what reasonable accommodation is. But even more important for those of us who live here in California, we have the California law. And this gives us even more protections for individuals with disabilities and employment. It's the California Fair Employment and Housing Act. And in this act, it's employers with 5 or more employees may not engage in discrimination based on physical disability, mental disability, medical conditions, or genetic information. And the definition of what a disability is broader in California law, as is then the obligation to provide those reasonable accommodations. And we're going to delve into some of these specifics just a little bit so you have a sense of it when it comes to employment and disability. So the areas covered under both ADA and the California law are all of this. It's the recruitment of individuals, it's the pay for that individual with a disability, the hiring and the firing of the individual with disabilities, promotion, job assignments, training, essentially anything that is employment related. And I want to re-highlight that it starts with the recruitment and hiring and pay, right? Those are key areas that a person with a disability cannot be discriminated against in. So the definition of a disability is also very different. It's not a medical definition of disability like Social Security. Disability is very medical based. The definition of a disability under the Americans with Disabilities Act, which is the federal law again, is that a person who has a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more major life activity. This includes people who have a record of such an impairment, even if they do not currently have a disability. It also includes individuals who do not have a disability, but are regarded as having a disability, so they don't have to have a diagnosis. The ADA also makes it unlawful to discriminate against a person based on that person's association with a person with a disability. That's federal law. California law is a little, again, broader. It's an impairment that makes performance of a major life activity difficult. It's a limitation, but not a substantial limitation. So again, it's a bigger definition. There's more that falls under California law than the ADA law. So keep that in mind. And what are major life activities, right? What does that mean? What does that even mean? Well, here we go. For ADA, it's seeing, typing, talking, writing, eating, walking, listening. And under California law, it is also working. California law states that working is a major life activity. So that if you have a limitation in that, you are covered to receive accommodations, reasonable accommodations in the employment world. Okay. Other important things to note about the laws is the record of a disability, even if you're not currently impaired by it. What does that mean? So let's say you are an individual who has severe anxiety disorder. You are currently, with the right therapies, the right medications, you are currently stable. You are fine. But you have that record of a disability. So if you were to become employed And if you were to have severe anxiety attack in a new environment with new stressors, you are protected because you have a record of that disability, even if you're not currently impaired by it at that moment of employment. So you have protections built in for you. So it could also be cyclical disabilities like schizophrenia, or even individuals with ADHD. They can have good days and bad days, right? So those are some things to think about by, even if not currently impaired by it. When they're talking about association with a person with a disability, what they're referring to is individuals that maybe are in the same household as somebody with a disability. So I, as a parent, cannot be denied employment by someone because I am a parent of an individual with a disability or a spouse of an individual with a disability. That cannot be a reason to not be denied employment or to be fired. Here in California, individuals who have specific learning disabilities specifically fall under the mental disabilities piece in California law. So your protections are there if you have a specific learning disability like dyslexia. And all of this means that an employer is obligated to provide a reasonable accommodation. We'll talk about what that means in a bit, unless the accommodation would represent an undue hardship to the business operation. So we're going to talk about that piece in a little bit. Like, what do you mean by undue hardship, right? What is reasonable? So the big question is, how do you get these wonderful accommodations, right? Well, the only one way to get them is you have to ask. So I'm going to show this video. I hope you can hear it okay. Just put a thumbs up if you can hear it okay, about how do you ask for an accommodation when you're at work.
Hey, Sam.
Hey, Claudia, how are you?
I'm good. Are you going to class today?
I am. I'm doing the yoga.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm excited about it.
Sam loves her job at the health club. Her dream career is to become a personal trainer. However, she's afraid of losing her job because of the side effects of her ADD medication. She spoke to her case planner about it and came up with a plan to ask her supervisor for an accommodation. Let's see how Sam handles it.
Hey Sam, is everything okay?
Hi, Chris. I'm about to speak with John, my supervisor, and ask for an accommodation. I'm nervous I'm going to say the wrong thing.
Listen, I think it's fantastic that you made the appointment, but before you meet with the guy, let's go over the steps you need to take to get an accommodation. Okay, so the first step is identify the part of your job where you're having trouble. For example, you get a little confused and you can't remember things. Second, you identify the challenge in your life. In this case, it's your medication. Third, you're able to identify what would help manage your side effects. For example, in this case, you're going to ask for help at your job.
Right. I'm having trouble with my tasks because of my medication. I guess I'll let John know how I can do my job better.
Oh, that sounds great. Now remember, you don't have to disclose too much.
Right. I don't really want people knowing that stuff about me or judging me because I have to take medication.
It's up to you to decide how much you want to disclose. Remember this, though. You want to start and end with your strengths. You are going to be fantastic.
Thanks, Chris. I feel a lot better. I'll let you know how it goes.
Come in.
Hi, John. Thanks for meeting with me.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Well, first I want to say that I love my job and I'm very grateful for the opportunity.
Well, I think you're doing really well here, Sam. As a matter of fact, I hear nothing but great things about your work. But you said you wanted to talk about something, so what's up?
Sometimes I forget the order of the task, but I do get everything done.
Okay. Well, do you feel that it's a serious enough issue where it's affecting your ability to do your work?
No, it's not serious, but I could use some help from Tina to make sure I'm doing the tasks in the right order. I just want to make sure I'm doing the best job I can.
Well, I prefer that Tina focus on her own duties while she's on her shift as opposed to worrying about anyone else's.
I understand. Could I come to you if I forget the order of the task? It won't be all the time.
Sure. But you know I'm not always available. So why don't I make a list of all your work that needs to be done in the order that it needs to be done, and I'll give it to you at the beginning of your shift.
Thank you, John. That would be really helpful. I really appreciate it. I want to continue to do the best job I can.
You got it. You're doing fantastic.
Even though John didn't give Sam the accommodation that she asked for, they were able to negotiate and find a solution that worked for the both of them. It involved a little give and take. Can you think of a situation where you negotiated with someone else to solve a problem?
Sam, good morning.
Hey, good morning, John. Thanks so much for talking to me yesterday. I really appreciate it.
You got it. My pleasure. As a matter of fact, I went ahead and made you a list. Let's go ahead and take a look at it, shall we? First things first, let's clean all the medicine balls. We have a class today, it's starting around 10. Let's make sure the children's play area is clean before anyone even gets here. Number 2 and 3 and 4, you can check for yourself.
Thanks.
Okay?
Yeah.
You got it.
So I'm going to stop there. But what I want you to notice is she never once said she needed an accommodation for her disability. That is not required. What? It's true. You have to identify the part of the job where you're having trouble or you anticipate needing some support. You need to be able to identify why that might be causing trouble. You have to identify what you need to get your job done. And that could be accommodations, that could be assistive technology. And you start and you end with your strengths. It is not required you disclose your disability unless you need to obtain those reasonable accommodations. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But the main thing here is self-advocacy, right? You need to know who you are. You need to know your strengths, and you need to know what you need to be successful in that job. Because there's no IEP in employment, right? There's none of that. You become your best voice. And the 3 parts to becoming an effective self-advocate are, like I just said, know yourself. What do you need to be successful? And how do you get what you need? Knowing how to get what you need, right? And this is from that website. And I would also add know your rights, because when you know that it's okay legally for you to ask for these things because you have a disability, it feels better than just asking out of the blue, right? It gives you confidence. And I love this quote by Judy Heumann: disability only becomes a tragedy when society fails to provide the things we need to lead our lives. So know your rights, know that you're allowed to ask for accommodations and strategies under the laws that I just talked about. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit more about disclosing a disability and how that can feel when you're in a job search situation. And here's another video I wanted to share with you.
I'm Dr. Taffy Kaneen, and I'm the Assistant Dean Director of the Office of Disability Services at the Georgia Institute of Technology. I'm contacted 1 or 2 times a week by industry professionals that are interested in hiring students with disabilities, interested in, offering internships to students with disabilities. There's so much opportunity out there. For our students with disabilities to gain experience within the computing field.
I'm Tammy Tidwell, and I work here at Do It as a program coordinator. Job fairs are overwhelming opportunities for anyone, so it's great when students take the opportunity to prepare ahead of time. The job search for students with disabilities is very similar to a standard job search. The only difference is that a student with disabilities needs to consider whether or not they need a disclosure strategy. So if, when, how, and to whom they would like to disclose.
The job search and disclosing your disability.
So if you have a visible disability, so if someone is going to meet you and see that you have a disability, many students decide to disclose before they meet that person face to face.
I'm Cindy, and I'm a third-year PhD student in the Department of Human-Centered Design and Engineering at the University of Washington. I'm totally blind. If I get connected with an opportunity based on a personal or networking connection, I don't hide anything because likely they already know because they've met me or their colleague met me. So I don't make it a point to say, oh, by the way, I'm blind, but I might make it a point to say, if you're going to need me to use a computer during the interview, I will need a computer with a screen reader. And if you're going to need me to maybe write on a whiteboard, I would prefer to instead type on a computer so that's accessible for me.
Hi, I'm Kay. Because my disability is a very obvious physical disability, I usually try to disclose as early as possible so I'm not shocking whoever I'm going to be interviewing with or meeting with in person. So I try to get it out on the table pretty early. If I hadn't already disclosed up to the point when I get called for an interview, I definitely want to let them know that I need an interview location that is wheelchair accessible.
I'm Richard Ladner, professor in computer science and engineering at the University of Washington. If you're deaf and you use sign language interpreters or captioning, you might have to disclose fairly early because you show up and there's no interpreter. You can't even have your interview. Or if you make a phone call and have a phone interview, you might do it through video relay service, and you're a male that's applying and the video relay operator is female, then people can be confused. And also there's some little delays because of the interpretation has delays. So having that phone interview if you're deaf is going to be very different. So disclosing probably is a good idea.
Someone with an invisible disability may decide not to disclose until after they've received a job offer.
My name is Matt May. I'm the Senior Program Manager for Accessibility at Adobe. In my case, it was immediately after I accepted the offer. I said, I'm going to be working at the time, on standards for accessibility. I'm going to be reading a lot of material. I need the ability to sit in a quiet room. I can't sit in cubicles with lots of noise happening. I won't be able to actually focus on this material. So I had a specific need that was related to how I related to the business, and I had a simple accommodation. Give me a place that I can work in quiet.
If it won't impact their job performance at all because they've chosen a job that suits their disability very well, then they may decide not to disclose even when they're hired.
And you can do that, right? So I'm going to stop there because that kind of goes through the range of disclosure, when to disclose, if to disclose, how to disclose. But again, I'm going to go back to what this gentleman said with the hidden disability is that, because his disability was not visible, he didn't disclose until he was hired because he didn't need to. He didn't need any accommodations during the hiring process, but he knew what he needed and he knew how to ask for what he needed. Again, know yourself, know how to ask for what you need. And the reason that it is actually under Title I, employers cannot ask someone even with a physical disability if they have a disability when they roll into their job interviews, right? Because they acknowledged, Title I acknowledges that we live in a very ableist society and that they can't ask, oh, do you have CP? But what they can ask is, do you have, it looks like you're going to need some accommodations for writing. Tell me how you would do the tasks of the job. Because in an interview process, when you're doing that give and back and forth and you're trying to get hired, you need to be able to say, hey, in order for me to do this job, I'm going to need to have access to, tools that will make it so that I can write. And these are the tools that I use. Or I'm going to need tools that make it so that I can read. And these are the tools that I use. So you have to know what you need to do the job duties as you understand them in that interview time. Okay. So they can't ask whether you have a particular disability. So just know that they can't ask that. It is up to you to choose to disclose or not disclose. Now, of course, my son who has CP, it's very obvious his disability. He uses a wheelchair, he has CP voice, his body moves differently. So he's very comfortable talking about his needs and his abilities and what he needs to be successful. And that's why he's fully employed now. My son with ADHD, he did not have to disclose his disability, his ADHD, to his current employer until he was hired. And he realized he was going to need some accommodations in terms of keeping a more consistent schedule for him, because that's how he does better. And they were able to negotiate that. So it's an individual choice. And it's really something that the person with a disability has to know who they are and have more information about the job before they decide if they need to disclose to get a reasonable accommodation. The other thing to remember is that if you do need a reasonable accommodation in the hiring process, for example, there's a computer test and you need a screen reader, you at that point will need to disclose so you can be successful and be hired, right? So you need to be at that point, maybe consider disclosing that you need that reasonable accommodation. Okay. Again, this is a discussion, and this is from another gentleman who was talking about who he himself has a disability. These are some words you can use. I need to do this work differently, or I'm having difficulty with this because of my disability. It's a discussion. It's not, you don't have to disclose your diagnosis. You can talk about what's difficult, what might work, what are the options. But generally, the onus is on you as the person with a disability to know what you need to be successful in that job. Okay. So again, it's not required at any time during the hiring process unless you need a reasonable accommodation during that process. If you do get hired and need reasonable accommodations to do the work, then you need to disclose to your manager or to the HR department of where you work, depending on the size of the company, that you have this need and you need accommodation. Now, some companies may require you to provide proof of your disability in order to provide those needed accommodations. If they do require this, and some companies do, they can only request medical records directly related to the disability, and those medical records are required to be kept out of, separate from your employee file so that it remains completely private. No one else needs to know. Okay, so I hope that gives you some confidence, knowing that it's okay to have a disability. You have rights under the law to get the accommodations that you need. Questions about any of that? Because that was a lot of blah right at once. Have any questions come up for anybody? Looks like we're okay.
Yeah, I don't see anything
very good
pertinent for right now.
Okay, very good. So we'll continue on. If something does come up, please put it in the chat or in the Q&A so we can make sure to get those addressed.
Yes, thanks. The Q&A would be great.
Perfect. Q&A then. Q&A it is.
Mhm.
All right. So now let's talk about accommodations. Oh, we do have a raised hand. Did you want to just go ahead and deal with that, Alyssa? Should I?
I'm not even sure I see the raised hand.
Okay. Jan raised her hand. His or her hand, sorry. Maybe if they could put it in the chat or the Q&A, and then we can figure out how to make sure we get Jan's comments, questions answered. That'd be great. I leave it to you, Alyssa.
Yeah, I think we'll do the questions at the end, and that way we'll be able to.
Okay, very good.
Continue on for the recording.
Perfect. Okay. So what kind of accommodations can I get? Under the law, California and Americans with Disabilities, called reasonable accommodations. So what does reasonable mean? First thing they look at is the cost to the employer. If you need a entirely new building put in your work because you have specific access needs that the current building that employer works out of does not have available to get because they're renting, that might not be a reasonable accommodation for that. That employer can say, you know what, that's not really reasonable for me. I can't move my job site because of your access needs. I can't reasonably do that. But what they can reasonably do is, if you need a ramp, is they can look at getting a ramp installed. If you need maybe a quiet room, they can look at maybe figuring out how to set up some cubes to get a quiet space for you, if that's what you need to be successful. If you need a certain kind of chair to sit in, maybe a wobble, maybe a ball chair because you need to move, they can do that. Those are reasonable accommodations. The other thing that they look at is essential job functions. Does your disability make it so that even with the right tools and strategies, you will not be able to do the essential job functions? They will look at that. So, for example, let's say you wanted to work at a movie theater, and you went through the hiring process and you got hired. Yay! Then you realize that they're going to put you in the snack area and you have extreme sensitivity to the smell of popcorn. It's just going to overwhelm you. You're not going to be able to handle it because you have sensory issues surrounding smells. And it's just going to be way more than you can handle to be over the popcorn machine. So is that an essential job function? If the only job opening that they have available is in the snack area, yes, that is an essential job function. Are there tools and strategies you can try to be successful in that area? Yes, you can ask if you can wear a mask with N95 filtration or a face mask and put maybe something you can tolerate a smell on the inside so that you smell that more than you smell the popcorn. So there's different things and strategies you can work with them on if that is the only position open in that movie theater. And you can also let them know that as soon as another position opens up, maybe the front counter, maybe cleaning, that you would prefer that position over the snack area. Okay, so you have to think about essential job function as well. And then you can think about what assistive technology tools might help in this job that could help me make this a reasonable accommodation. So now we're going to dig into that a little bit. Okay. So what is assistive technology? There is a law that is a federal law, back to laws again, called the Assistive Technology Act of 2004. And it basically says that assistive technology is any tool that you can purchase off the shelf. I think I have the actual quote on the next slide, so I'll read it then. But basically, the Assistive Technology Federal Act has made it so that every state, and in California, it's abilitytools.org, has an AT group that works within the state that helps individuals and companies with assistive technology and accommodation needs, among other things. So again, California, it's Ability Tools, and in California, Ability Tools has offices statewide, generally in the independent living centers in your local area. Also in California, if you're a regional center client, assistive technology is covered under the Lanterman Act, which covers regional center clients here in California, under adaptive equipment and supplies, as well as in supported living. So here's the definition of assistive technology under federal law. It is any item, piece of equipment, or product system, whether acquired commercially, modified, or customized, that is used to increase, maintain, or improve functional capabilities of individuals with disabilities. So do you see how that really fits well into What is a disability? What are the areas of disabilities that are covered under Title I of the ADA, right? This all kind of ties together. So AT can really help individuals within employment be successful in an employment setting with the right AT tools and strategies. The other thing to remember is that the assistive technology tools and accommodations needed maybe in education may be very different than what you will need in employment. Okay. So in education, the focus is on getting you to a point where you've exited the system. Hopefully you've learned to read and write and all of that. You're going to be needing tools. Perhaps you need assistive technology tools to be able to graduate. My son with ADHD, his assistive technology tools was, they had a calendar system in high school that he used to keep track of all of his assignments. It was their calendar system. He also used his friends a lot as an accommodation to ask what's due in class, right? Because scheduling was difficult for him. Well, of course, that calendar system did not follow him into college. And now the calendar system that he's now using as an employed person is also different than what he used in college, because now he's using his employer's calendar system. So he had to be able to switch the calendar system to fit where he was. And he was able to do that. It took him a little bit. He had to learn the ins and outs of the calendar system and how to set alarms and alerts and figure out what was going to work for him in an employment setting. But it was different than what he used in the education setting. But he was able to do that so that he was successful. With my other son with cerebral palsy, he basically with the tools he brought into college, because he lived away from home in a dorm when he went to college, a 4-year college, those tools he used in the college setting to write, to read, to be successful are the same tools he's still using as an employed person, because that's what he needs to be successful, to write and to be successful in school and in his employment. So for him, it was the tools he ended up using in college. So now you may be asking, how do I find out what's appropriate? How do I know what's out there? How do I know what's going to work? Well, there's a wonderful website called askjan.org, and it's all about employment and people with disabilities and accommodations and assistive technology and how to access them. And they have the Ask Jan website set up for the individuals with the disabilities. They can go and search. The employers, they can also go and search within Jan. And they have this wonderful part of Jan called SOAR, which is their searchable online accommodation resource. And this is fantastic because you just go to this website, you type in, okay, I have a reading disability. I need text to speech, and it needs to be HIPAA compliant because I'm going to be working in a medical setting. What's out there? It will give you a list, and you can start working with your employer on the different tools. So that's one wonderful resource to find out what are some accommodations that are common in the workplace for people with disabilities and how to get them and how to access them. And that's both from the employer point of view as well as the individual with a disability point of view. Another great place to look is the AT3 Center, Disability Employment Center, has a toolkit, Assistive Technology and Employment Toolkit. So this is another place to access to find out more about how assistive technology can help with employment, because it is different than education system, right? And how to pursue and sustain a competitive integrated employment using assistive technology tools and strategies. So this is another resource that you can access to find out what tools are available. And as well, of course, you can always contact abilitytools.org and see if they can help you, give you some ideas. So who pays for all this great stuff? If you're already employed, your employer does. And I'm going to talk about some incentives that you can help the employers know exist federally to encourage them to pay for the accommodations and the assistive technology tools that you need. Now, if you're just starting, right, if you are still in school, maybe you're still a junior in high school, senior in high school, maybe you're just looking for work now, you've exited the system and you've graduated it, but you really want to work, you can become a client of the Department of Vocational Rehabilitation here within the state of California. And what they can do is not only can they help you, get your resume up to date and make sure you have the skills that you need to interview appropriately, they can also work with you on figuring out, okay, you want to do this job, and these are your abilities and these are your needs. And these are the tools. We're going to figure out what tools you need to be successfully employed. So they can help you figure out what those tools are to become employed. And those tools then will go with you because they will make sure they teach you how to use them before you get into that employment setting. So this is why you're still in the job search area and you're still looking for work, you're still gaining the skills you need to work. Department of Voc Rehab can be a really great place to find out more about what tools are available, and they can in fact help pay for those tools if you need them for reasonable accommodation to get hired. Okay, but you do have to be a client of Department of Rehab. Medical insurance is also another place to go if it is a medically necessary device. So if you have a speech disability and you need a speech generating device that works on a phone because you're going to find a job that needs to, you're going to do some phone work. And you might want to connect with your medical insurance and see if they will pay for that speech generating device or AAC as part of something that you can then take not just to work, but to have it at home as well. So this would be only if you need something that is medically necessary that can go both between work and home, right? Something you need in both places. And you can also check in with the regional center if you are a regional center client about helping pay for any accommodations or AT needed. But if you're already employed, it defaults to the employer needs to pay for that. That is your default person. So funding options for employers is there are some federal tax incentives available. And here's a list of some of them. And again, this is on the it should say askjan.org website. There's a typo in there. Sorry about that. But it is, there are some funding options available for employers, federal tax incentives that they can access if they are hiring somebody with a disability and they do need to purchase or create reasonable accommodations for that individual so that they can be employed. Okay. And for Department of Vocational Rehab, it needs to be one of your it needs to match your employment goals. Okay. Because DOR is looking at employing you. They want you to be a success story. They want you to become employed. That is their goal. Okay. And services that they can provide include help pay for college tuition. They can help pay for textbooks. They can help pay for assistive technology. And that could be computer systems, listening aids, visual supports, augmentative communication, even home modifications if needed. Not work modifications, home modifications. If you need those tools to be successfully employed, to look for a job, to be successful in the hiring process, they will, as long as it's one of your employment goals and you've agreed to it, they'll cover it for you. Okay. So know that that exists for regional center clients. For regional center clients, there is supported employment. This is an agreement at the state level between the California Department of Developmental Services and the Department of Rehabilitation. Okay, it's for regional center clients. And what that does is the Department of Rehab and DDS provides additional job coaching support in a competitive work setting with the supports to be fated as mastery of the job skills emerges. So they won't provide a coach that'll be lifelong, but they will provide a coach one of the things that they do is provide additional job coaching in a competitive work setting, with a goal to fade those supports as the mastery of the job skill emerges. And that's supported employment. So here's a little video to kind of explain it a little bit better than what I just did.
Supported employment is a system of training individuals with a disability on how to become a fully productive employee. It's key to find jobs that are appropriate for an individual based on their skill set and limitations. When the right job is found and a business allows a job coach to work with the new employee, great things can happen. Here's how it's done. A person with a disability would like to enter the workforce, but they may need a little extra help. So they go to the Department of Rehabilitative Services. This is a state agency that provides assistance to people with disabilities. After meeting with a counselor, an employment agency like Stand Up Incorporated, which specializes in training workers with disabilities, is contracted, and a job coach is assigned to provide assistance. A job coach's role is to match the skills and abilities of the job seeker to the career that coincides with their employment goals. This ensures that the jobs that are applied for are jobs that are appropriate. The job coach and their client work together to find employment opportunities in the same way that you and I would look for a new job. Applications and resumes are submitted and interviews are scheduled. At the interview, if the business is willing, the coach may accompany the applicant. The coach is not there to interfere, but rather to assist the applicant should the need arise. When talking with the interviewer, the job coach will explain how they can offer support if the candidate is hired. After a job is offered and accepted, the job coach and new employee arrive to work together to begin training. The job coach is there to assist the new employee. They work with the new employee one-on-one to help train them to ensure productivity. This saves the business time and money. As the employer explains the job to the new employee, the job coach listens and learns the job as well. Job coaches learn new jobs all the time. A job coach is professional. They have experience in a variety of fields and work settings. As the new employee learns their new job, they may be a little less productive in the beginning. The coach is there to take up any slack. So at the end of the day, the business has achieved 100% productivity. This may have been accomplished 30% by the employee and 70% by the coach. But as time goes on and the employee increases in productivity, the coach will back away little by little. Before you know it, the employee has reached 100% of the productivity goal, which is always determined by the employer. After the employee has become more independent, the job coach won't need to be there all the time, but will simply check in occasionally to ensure that things are going smoothly. If anything were to happen and a job coach is needed, they are only a phone call away. Job coaches are available to help with any issues, whether good or bad. Just call and someone will be there. Hiring an individual with a disability is a win-win. The business gets a committed, hardworking employee.
And the rest is a commercial for the business Stand Up Incorporated. But so essentially supported employment just gives you that extra support to those individuals who might need it to be successful in the job environment that they're applying for. So that is an accommodation that you can work with getting under supported employment if this is a regional center client. Okay, so I just kind of wanted you to be aware of that.
Is assisted.
All right, because under the Lanterman Act, assistive technology, if an assistive technology is needed to be successful in a workplace, they are the funders of last resort. So you have to show regional center that other possible funding sources have been denied or are not applicable. And that you must also show that that assistive technology tool is needed to meet an IPP or a self-determination goal. And then they can consider funding that assistive technology tool in that employment setting. But again, if this is an individual that is already employed, it is up to the employer to pay for that assistive technology tool. So I'm going to leave you with a bunch of resources. But this is the chance now for you to ask me questions about anything specific you may have questions about. Just so you know, when my son, who has cerebral palsy, became employed, his employer had to purchase the assistive technology tools he needed to be successful in the job. His adapted keyboard, his joystick that he uses to type with, and the adapted phone he needed to make his phone calls back and forth. The employer was on the hook to pay for those things. John knew what he needed, but the employer had to pay for it in the work and setting. Okay, so that was something that had to happen. And if my other son had needed specific tools, it would have been up to his employment to pay for those specific tools, but he was able to work with the employer with the tools that they had to make those tools work for him, given his needs. But again, going back to the key in all of this is both of them knew what they needed and they knew how to ask for what they needed. So that is key. I can't go high enough about self-advocacy skills are so very important. You need to ask for what you need. You need to be comfortable saying, hey, you know what? I struggle in this area. This tool really helps me. Can I have that tool? Because I want to be successful at this job. And that's the key. That right there is the key. Know that you have the law behind you. The law is behind you for that. Okay, so this is all information on disability. Here's information on Ability Tools of California, as well as I included a bunch of information about some different telephone access programs, because people often have questions about them here in California. So here you go. There's some more resources for you. And that's my contact information. So now I'm going to stop sharing because I want to open this up to questions anybody might have that I can hopefully answer for you.
Okay, so Debbie, there are several questions in the Q&A, which I'll start reading off, but just to draw everyone's attention to the chat, I have put in the links to the evaluations in each of the languages. If you wouldn't mind, please clicking on that. It's just 3 quick questions. It just helps us to collect the data. We bring that data to funders. Funders say, yay, it was a good presentation. We want to fund more of them. So if you could help us out, I'd very much appreciate it. And I'm going to start the questions. You just mentioned something about self-advocacy,
yes,
Debbie, and somebody asked a question that I think is a good one. I'd love for you to speak to. And they say, what if a person with ID is not able to self-advocate?
Good question. So if you are working with an individual with ID who is not able to self-advocate because they don't have the ability and to do so, what I would look at is the person-centered planning tools that are available to help them be able to find who their circle of support is and what is important to them, what is important for them, and be able to create with them a one-page profile that they can then present to an employer. Once you have a sense of what is important for that person, what do they need to be successful, and you can get this conversation through the circle of support, you can get this conversation through, the individual themselves, you can, do this whole person-centered plan, and the part of that can be creating this one-page profile for employment. That is, this is who I am. This is what people appreciate about me. This is what's important to me. And this is how you can support me. Just those 3 simple things is that one-page profile. It's very, very powerful. And that would be something I would be sure to create with them that they can then present to employers, to different people outside of their immediate circle of support, so that individual can be successful.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
What accommodations could be used for general anxiety disorder when interviewing and on the job?
Okay, when interviewing, it's a little tricky. What I would start with is making sure you've done a lot of practice interviews, that you feel comfortable answering questions, that you've done your homework, you've done your research, you know about the company, you know about the job you're applying for, that you've done everything you can to build up your confidence, and you've also are using your strategies. I'm assuming you have some if you have anxiety disorder, for calming. Okay, so that you are doing everything you can to be calm. And know that every single person going into an interview is nervous. the interviewee is going to expect to see a little bit of sweat, a little bit of, nerves. That's normal. And it's okay to say, I'm really nervous. That's okay. They expect that in an interview situation. As long as you're able to tell them why you are the best person for that job, you're golden. And you can even write it out. If that helps you get through the interview process, write down your key points, bring them in on 3x5s or on a piece of paper or on your phone that you can read them off so that you have them in front of you, because, so many people going into those situations, like their mind goes blank, right? So have it written down and refer to it. And that's okay. They expect it. Now, when you get to the job, when you've been hired, because of course you'll be hired, you're amazing. That's where you can look at the job environment and decide what accommodations you might need for your anxiety. Okay. And if you're in a situation, let's say you're in a big cube farm, right? You know what those are, where everyone has a cube and you're all together. And there's a lot of information coming at you. And maybe that's just going to send your anxiety up because you think everyone's listening in. That's where you can do what that gentleman at Adobe did, is say, look, I need a quiet environment. I need a place where I have quiet in order to be successful at work. So be prepared to say, not that I have anxiety, because that's not helpful to the employer to provide an accommodation, but you need to be able to say, this is what I need to do to be successful in this environment. So again, it goes back to what makes you uncomfortable is the big cube farm. What would make you comfortable is to have a quiet corner in the cube farm that is yours, that you can kind of use to get away. So be prepared to say, this is what would make me work and be more successful at my job. Does that make sense? And again, if they need proof that you have a disability, or if you feel like that would help you, look, I have anxiety disorder. I really can't be the front desk person, on call because I can't handle that, then you might need to show proof of disability. But that's something between you and the manager or the HR department to discuss.
Speaking of proof, we have a question asking, what if the application asks for proof with a California driver's license, but you can do the job without the license?
Right.
How do
and
you
that
get
happens,
around that in the
that happened
application
to my
process?
son all the time, because no, my son with CP does not drive. And he provides his California ID number. It looks just like a driver's license number. It is recognized by the state of California as legitimate. And if driving is not a part of what is required, that is fine. They're generally asking for a driver's license to show that you are indeed a resident of California. So California ID was what he would put down, and he wouldn't even say that it was a California ID license. He would just write that number down and let them figure it out.
Okay, great. How are essential job, I think this is what it means, how are essential job functions defined? For example, I was asked to do public presentations, which is not in the job ad, and was told it's not possible to include everything in the job description.
Mm-hmm. So this is where you would have to have a discussion. And actually, my son was actually let go of a position, my older son, because public speaking was part of the things that they needed him to do. And he has very dysarthric speech, and he wasn't understood by the attendees. So they let him go, and he could have sued, but he decided not to. So you've got options. One thing you can say is, if public speaking is an essential job function that needs to be listed in the job application or discussed before you accept that application, right? If they did neither of those, if they did not list it or discuss it with you before you signed the agreement to work for them, then you have a case to go to them and say, look, this is what I signed. These are the job duties I agreed to. Here's my contract with you. In this contract, it does not list public speaking. So we need to open this discussion because I am not comfortable public speaking. I won't do it. I'm very nervous. So it's very important before you accept a job to make sure that that contract you have with that employer lists all your job duties that they expect you to do. And if that is on there, then you have a discussion point you can talk about, because public speaking is big. That's a big one. So that's quite a change from, sitting at your desk answering phones. So yes, you do make sure you read that agreement before you sign it.
Okay. Great. Does having ADHD qualify for Department of Rehab services?
Yes.
It's a very quick, that's a very quick question and answer.
Yeah.
How about advice, tips you have for students with an IEP trying to become better self-advocates in school?
Ooh, that's a whole other class.
That's a whole training in and of itself. That's right.
So for students with IEPs, in order to become better self-advocates, the first thing I would have them work on is make sure they know what they're good at. What is their skill set? What do they like? Because part of being a good self-advocate is knowing who you are, not just your support needs, which is important to know as well, but also your abilities. Think back to that first video I showed. That first video was a woman who, was advised to start and end with your strengths. So make sure that person with an IEP can start and end with their strengths, their abilities. What are they good at? And this is what I need to be successful, right? Because that's what's most important. And again, if you're working with individuals with ID, you have a wonderful slew of things that you can access under person-centered planning tools to help them see what they're good at. This is not that webinar, but it could be.
we have some time. We can shove it in there in 10 minutes.
But yes, person-centered planning tools are terrific tools for individuals to figure out what are they good at, what do people appreciate about me, and what are my needs? How can people support me so that I can be successful?
And the only thing I would add to that is just to consider, if you have an IEP, attending your IEP meeting.
Always.
And working up to potentially running your IEP meeting, depending on how many years you have left and how comfortable you are with being there and presenting. But it's really good to face that.
Oh yeah.
If it's a fear, and overcome it and go to that meeting. It's your meeting after all. As a student.
Exactly. And my son with CP, he started attending his IEP meetings in 3rd grade. And was he a very productive member of the team at that point? No. But it did a couple of things. It kept the IEP team focused to the person, the child, the individual, because he was there. And he had interesting things for input. When he was in 3rd grade, his biggest fear, and this is, he happily told them at the IEP, is that when he's out there in his wheelchair at recess time, he was terrified of being hit in the head with a ball because of all the kids playing ball on the playground. And the team was like, we didn't know. So they created a space on the playground that was a ball-free zone that he could comfortably be in. And now that's a minor thing, but think about what power that gave him in such a small request. He realized his voice was powerful and was meant to be heard. And that lesson stuck with him. So even if maybe their contribution is small, like, I don't like sitting next to the kid in class who is constantly clicking their pen. If that, by saying that at that IEP meeting, and they get to move to a different chair, they now know my voice is important. I have rights. I can ask for them. And that's powerful. And that takes them through. That's the first step in self-advocacy, is knowing that their voice matters. Because it does.
And then another DOR question, the minimum age to become a client, a DOR client, someone has a 15-year-old son, 15, who would like to find a summer job. Can DOR help them? He is a client of the regional center.
I think in that case, it might be 6.
I believe it's 16.
I think it's 16.
Some DORs do have one program that starts at 12. But not
it works through the school.
DORs have that, right? It could be part of some kind of school workability.
Yeah.
So the thing about DOR is that there's statewide DOR with all the things that the DORs offer, and then each individual regional office kind of interprets what they offer in a different way. And in fact, doesn't Debbie's older son work for?
Yes, he is.
Right. So Debbie knows a bit about DOR, but I'll let you talk a little bit more about that if you want to.
I would suggest, if your son is interested in summer employment, Yay, first of all. And the second thing is I would, if you don't already have a transition plan under your IEP, you can start that now. And you can make one of the goals of the transition plan, having him, write a resume, do practice interview skills, figure out where he wants to get a summer job. That can be part of his transition planning towards employment. So transition plan can start if they have an IEP as early as 14. 16 is the maximum age. It has to start by 16, but you can start that one earlier. So that's a whole other presentation.
Yeah, and someone was also asking about elaborating on circle of support. And in the Q&A, I just did send the link to the family care notebook that is on PHP's website that will tell you a lot more about person-centered thinking, person-centered plans, and circles of support, what's important to, what's important for. You actually have one of the main authors of that family care family notebook right on screen with us. Debbie was one of the authors of that, or maybe the author of it, I'm not sure.
No, it wasn't no.
Right. So it was a team effort.
Yes.
But anyway, I have put that in there because I want to get on to a couple of other questions. Okay. Person-centered planning is a
whole other
it's an 8-hour presentation.
Yes.
So, let's see. My son has speech and language problems and sensory issues. Despite that, he's working in a job for 3 years in an office. He does better with text versus verbal response. Also, he needs to have instructions summarized in written form. Mm-hmm. Also, he has noise sensitivity. Are these accommodations appropriate?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. And if he's getting any pushback, maybe from a new manager, he can just write down his list of accommodations he needs and just have that approved and put that in his HR file. Done. Easily done.
How about uncontrolled staring spells that cause you to be a little less productive than another person because your brain freezes every once in a while? When or how do you disclose this?
I would disclose that if it is impacting your productivity. And the staring spells, if they're a result of like your brain is just goes into overload. So you just stare into space to kind of recenter yourself. You could see if there's a place you can go within the office and take a 10-minute break, 15-minute break, whatever you need to do to get through that staring spell a little bit faster. Whatever works for at home might work in the office. Kind of figure out what you need to be more successful productivity wise in the office. But if your manager is coming at you saying, your productivity level is not up to where it is with so-and-so, that's where you would consider disclosing. I have this disability. This is my disability. And this is what I need to be more successful. But you kind of need to, again, this is where it's on you as the employee to know what you need to be more successful. What works in the home to get you through those staring spells, to get you through that piece of it. And what can you then do to replicate that as best as possible in the work environment so you can get through them faster so that you can be more productive. The other thing you can consider saying is, look, I had a really bad one today. I was completely overwhelmed. I froze out for 2 hours. I'm sorry. Can I take the work home with me? If that's an accommodation they can make. And if it's something you're willing to do. Something you can negotiate. It's a negotiation point.
Thanks. And I'm just going to put another plug in for just clicking on those links for the evaluations. We only have about 33% of the folks responding so far. So
shame.
I'm not going to let Debbie answer another question unless we get more responses. But no, if you could please, they're just 3 very simple questions. It's just, we really do need the data. And then someone here is responding, talking about student services with DOR, and they're saying that it's from 18 to 22. It's actually from 16 through 21, right. So the end of the 21st year. And actually, we have someone coming from DOR. Her name is Nancy Wentling. She'll be here in May, and she's talking specifically about student services. So I think it's May, I want to say 17th.
Yeah. And just so you know, DOR services can start at 16. As a student service. It depends on your area, depends on the office. Generally, DOR can do a transition planning services. Some can, some can't. It just depends. Student services for DOR is 18 to 21 or 22.
Student services 16 to
16,
to 21.
Yep, 16 to 21, 22. Know that if you are at 16 starting with DOR, probably it'll be through your school, and DOR will be looking in, but not really doing a whole lot yet until you are ready to exit the school. And then they've already got your info on file and they can just roll with you after that. So kind of know there is that kind of weird sort of playback with school and DOR. And
Yeah,
in
it's
most,
very confusing.
it's very confusing because each office is different. And that's what makes it confusing here in California.
Yeah.
And
you'll see the terms workability.
Yeah.
You'll see this term transition partnership program might also surface.
TPP.
So just know that there are different avenues into DOR.
Yeah.
But services usually begin at 16 unless they happen to begin at 12 if they have that certain service, which
that one service.
it's very confusing. We have to laugh about it.
And again, just to assure people that you are somebody who is now 21, 22, does that mean I get no DOR services? No. There are adult services that you seamlessly transition into.
Yes,
You
that's
may
called
end up-
supported employment. So
Yeah.
if you were going to look it up anything online, you'd look up student services DOR or supported employment services DOR.
Yeah, and that just kind of rolls. And it's not just supported employment, it's employment services also. It's not just supported, it's supported and regular employment services through DOR. So just to muddy the waters.
Yeah, just to keep us on our toes and totally confused.
Exactly.
Okay, let's see. It is 7:45. Do you want to take one last question,
One
Debbie,
more
or-
and then we can call it done. Yeah,
Yes.
this will be the
okay.
last question.
So somebody wants your opinion of types of occupations they should look for as someone who experiences bad contamination OCD. The only local yet remote work able to find is in fields outside of my field of study, like programming, business executive, psychology, law. I feel like I spent enough time in a university. Should I just head back to school? Any wisdom there as we usher us off?
But my first thing is, what is your field of study? What are you studying? And I think remote work is such a valid thing right now. And it's been shown through COVID that most positions, not all, can be done remote. I know therapists that work only remotely that normally would be in person. So a lot of those person-to-person things that used to happen, no one thought they could be remote. Hey, it works actually pretty good remote. So don't get frustrated by that. Be creative. I don't know your field of study. I don't know. I mean, if your field of study is science and you need a science lab, that may be challenging to do remotely unless you want to have your own science lab in your house, which I don't think that would be it. But I don't know. Depends on your field of study, and it depends on what your employment goal is and how you can find. The other thing you can do is contact Department of Rehab. Even though you're already employed, if you're not happy with your employment and you have a disability, they can help you transition to another employment. So they may be a resource for you as well to connect with.
Okay. Well, I want to thank Debbie for taking her time and sharing her wisdom with us this evening yet again. And to thank Cayenne and Tiffany and Beatrice for doing their expert interpretation. Thank you everyone who showed up tonight. We know how valuable your time is. That's why we try and keep them to our hour and 15 minutes, hour and 18 minutes.
Sorry, I talk too much.
We thank you for coming, and we hope to see you again real soon.